Personal finance practice problem using OneNote. Pay period comparisons. Prepare to get financially fit by practicing personal finance. Here we are in OneNote. If you have access to OneNote, would like to follow along, you're not required to, but if would like to, we're in the icon on the left-hand side. We're in the Practice Problems tab down in the 5171 Pay Period Comparison tab. Also note, when using OneNote, take a look at the Immersive Reader tool. Our presentations will also be in the text area with the same name, same number, but with transcripts that can be translated into multiple different languages and either listened to or read in them. Closing the icon, we got our information up top, calculations on down below. We're looking at different types of pay periods, comparing and contrasting them, especially for budgeting type of purposes, in which case we might need to annualize our income, or we might need to make it into, say, a monthly period for our monthly budgeting. So typically, when working for a company, we get paid either weekly, semi-monthly, or bi-weekly, or possibly monthly, but that's a fairly easy one to be calculating. So these are ones that can be a little bit confusing when we want to take something, say, from weekly, semi-monthly, or bi-weekly to either annually or bring it back to a monthly calculation, annually often being used when we make comparisons to other types of employment, possibly thinking of other types of opportunities and seeing how we line up. Clearly, the annual is a comparison unit often used. And then when we look at the monthly, often used when we're thinking about budgeting situations, or if we're trying to work with someone to get a loan or something like that, they're also going to want our information oftentimes broken out in a monthly format. Now, obviously, if we're paid salary and we know what our annual salary is and our income is fixed, then we can take the annual and break it down into the monthly. But if we're paid hourly or something like that, and it changes, but it's somewhat standardized, then we might have to say, well, how am I going to kind of take that and tie it into a yearly rate if I want to compare to other jobs, and or to a monthly rate if I'm trying to use it for some kind of budgeting purposes, or use budget scenarios or ratios on a budget basis. Then how can we do that? Now, the typical component that we would want to use is to first annualize and then bring it back to whatever period, typically monthly, that we're going to be looking for. And that usually will make it a little bit easier, just as a general rule, to say, okay, in other words, if I'm looking at the weekly calculation here and I'm trying to bring it up to a monthly calculation, our tendency will be to say, well, it should be an easy one-step process. I should just be able to say how many, weeks are in a month and just bring it up to the monthly calculation. But it's not quite that easy, given the fact that the year is not exactly even. It's a mess, because we measure this whole thing about how we go around the sun, and it doesn't happen all at the same time, and the world is spinning, and it's not even, and doesn't all work out evenly, and it's all a mess, right? So not everything quite works out the way nice and even like it's supposed to. And so we know how many weeks are in a month. It's not even, like 4. No, not quite. It's like 4.3, but it's really like 4 1/3. So it's easier to get a more accurate number to annualize it usually, and then bring it back. Also, most people are probably paid on the semi-monthly or the bi-weekly, and those things look similar, but they're actually somewhat different. The semi-monthly is twice a month, and the bi-weekly is twice a week. And again, because there's 365 days, but unless there's a leap year, and because the months are like 30 days and then like 31 days, but sometimes 28, and sometimes different than that when you have it's all a mess, right? So how can we get an accurate number? It's usually easier to annualize and then bring it back as a general rule. Okay, so let's do it then. So we got the weekly pay. We figured these out to all come out to the same annual pay, we believe. So they're all similar numbers here. We're going to say, I want to bring the weekly pay to the monthly pay. So we're going to apply the general rule. Let's annualize it first, and then we'll bring it back to the monthly. And that way we can get both of those at the same time, to annualizing and monthly, and doing the easier thing typically when looking for the monthly calculation. So we got the weekly at the 1154, and then we're going to say that the number of weeks is going to be 52. And note that we kind of rounded this, so we're really going to say it's 1153.85 is the actual number, rounded to 11554. And then we've got the weeks in a year. Now, you might want to just memorize the average weeks in a year. Again, it's not perfect, because you can say, well, the days in a year are like 365 generally, and if we divide that by 7 days, we get about 52.14 and so on. But 52 is a fairly close number that we'll use, so I'm going to use 52 here. We're using the weekly amount about the 1153.85 rounded to 1154, but we're actually using closer to this number over here. And then if we multiply that out, we're going to say then the 1153.85 times 52 is going to give us about 60,000 here. And again, there's rounding here because we tried to make it come out to 60,000 exactly to match all these up. So that would be the annual amount. So if we have the annual amount, then we can bring it back to the monthly amount by taking that divided by the number of months in a year, which would be 12, and that would give us the 5,000. So that's usually a little bit easier than to do it the second way, which is to try to get it directly from the weekly to the monthly. So if we took, say, the weekly amount at the 1154, 1153.85 more closely about, and then we tried to say how many weeks in a month are there. The first guess would be 4, most likely, but that's not exactly right. So if we try to figure it out a little bit more closely, we'd say, well, how many weeks are in a year? We could say, well, how many weeks are in a year? That it's close to, again, 365 days in a year that we kind of want to know. Also, just realize it's useful to know, like, the round number, which sometimes we round things for certain calculations, and it's nice to say, well, let's pretend there's 30 days in each month times 12. So sometimes you'll see the year being calculated as 360. Why? Because that means 12 nice even units, even though the sun isn't helping us out with the earth spinning like nice and evenly in that way or whatever, you know. So even though it's not quite even, it's more like 365 divided by, let's say, divide by 7 days. That'd be about that 52. So we're going to use 52. And then we'll take that 52 divided by 12, and we get to the 4.33. So a lot of people memorize closer. You might more closely memorize 4.3 is general, but it's closer to like 4 1/3, right? 4 and 1 divided by 3, 4 1/3. So if you were to use that, if you use 4 1/3, then you can go right from pretty close to this 1153.85, and then times 4.333333, you know, on forever, and you get pretty close to that 5,000. So you can do this jump by going from weekly to monthly, but again, you got to kind of realize that it's not 4 weeks. It's going to be 4 1/3 about, and it might be easier just as a general rule to do the annual calculation and then break it down to a monthly. Let's do these two, the semi-monthly and the bi-weekly. Now, semi-monthly is a funny one because it's kind of nice, but it's kind of funny because we basically said, hey, I'm going to take all the months and pay people in the middle of the month and the end of the month, which is weird because the months are different. Some have 30 days, some could have 28 days, 29 days, 31 days. So to be paying people in the middle of the month and at the end at like the 15th and either the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, or the 31st means that you've got uneven pay periods that you're paying. But it's nice because then you know exactly how many times you're paying in a year, which would simply be if you thought of the calculation, we'd say, well, there's 12 months and we're going to force ourselves to pay twice a month, even though the months aren't the same length in time. And so we've got then the 12 months times 2 in a nice even 24. That's different than if we did bi-weekly, because bi-weekly we're paying every 2 weeks, and that means that the distance between pay periods will be uniform, which makes sense. But because the months aren't uniform, we're not going to be paying exactly 2 each time period. We're going to be paying on different dates per month. So that means you have closer to something like 52 weeks in a year divided by 26 pay periods. So these two, although they look the same, are actually different in terms of the number of pay periods. One has closer to 24 periods, the other has 26. So let's look at the semi-monthly. We're going to do our same strategy. How can we get it to the monthly amount? Well, I would say the general rule to apply, although this one's the easiest to kind of do either way, but the general rule, let's try to annualize it and then pull it back to the monthly, just like our general rule. So we say the semi-monthly amount we get paid, $2,500. The periods in a year, we're going to say the months in a year are 12. And so if we multiply that times 2, that means that there's going to be 24 periods in a year. And that's nice and easy. And this one, semi-monthly, that's how you want to think of it. You want to think of 12 months that you're doubling because you're forcing yourself to pay 2 times per month, even though the months are different in terms of their lengths. And so then we're just going to take that 2500 times 24. That would be the annual amount, which again, we tried to make even 60,000. That's why we had some uneven numbers up top. That this was really 115385 because we're trying to have the 60,000 being the even amount and so on. So, okay, so there's the 60. And then we've got the months in a year, which are going to be 12. So we just take that once again divided by 12 and we get back to our 5,000. Same thing we got up top here, 5,000. So then you could do this one pretty clearly, pretty easily by saying, hey, that one I could just jump from the semi-monthly to the monthly. I don't have to annualize it and bring it back down because I know that I've artificially made 2 pay periods per month, because no matter what the month is, no matter how many days are in it, we're going to pay people twice a month. So that's pretty straightforward calculation. Even this way, you just take the 2,500 times 2 would be 5,000. Let's do the bi-weekly. Now, bi-weekly is different than the semi-monthly. They're different. They're not the same. These two, semi-monthly, bi-weekly, they're different. Those things, they're not the same. Okay. So what does that mean? Bi-weekly means that you're paying twice a week, so the pay periods are the same, uniform, but that means that you're not going to be paying exactly twice a month per se, or at the same time in each month, because the months are different. And so this time you don't want to take the 12 months times 2, because you're really being guided by the weeks. And there's about, as we said, 52 weeks in a year, which you can kind of figure by saying there's about 365 days in a year, divided by 7 days in a week is about 52. So I'm going to take about 52 divided by the 7 days in a week. And well, hold on a second. 52 divided by about the 2 divided by 2, because we're paying every 2 weeks. Those are 26 instead of 24. 26 periods instead of 24 in essence. So we got the bi-weekly amount, which is more accurately actually this again, because we're trying to make it come out to 60,000. So it's really 2,307.69 that we're using, or closer to that number, rather than rounded to 2,308. And then we've got the number of periods, which we're going to say weeks in a year are about 52. And we're going to divide that by 2. That means we have 26 pay periods in a year instead of the 24 that we had last time. That's because these two things are different. Semi-monthly, bi-weekly, they're not the same. Those two things are different. So then we can take then the 2307.69 about, and we can multiply it times 26 pay periods, and we get about the 59,999 again, because this number is in essence rounded here. So we'll get about the 60,000 again. And then of course we could divide that by 12 to get to our 5,000 on the monthly, which we tried to standardize all these to be the same. Now you could do this one. This one's kind of the more complex one to try to get to directly from a bi-weekly to monthly amount because of that strange unevenness. But you could do it. You know, you probably, this would be the least likely to try to make the jump right from bi-weekly to monthly. This is one of the least likely ones you'd want to do this with. This is why, in general, annualizing first and then bringing it back is just an easier system usually. But we could do it. We could say the bi-weekly is the 2,308, about, more accurately 2,307.69. We could take the weeks in a year, which are going to be 52, divide that by 2. That would give us 26 pay periods. And then we could just simply take that, which we did last time, and just divide it by 12. So if I say if there's 26 pay periods divided by 12, then we're going to say that we have about the periods in a month are about 2.1667. So there's not 2 periods a month. In other words, if I'm trying to go from the bi-weekly periods and say how many periods are in a month, it's a funny number. It's about 2.1666 on forever. And then once we have that, then of course we can take that and multiply it directly times the 2,308, and we get around our 5,000. Again, there's rounding that is involved. This one, again, probably the least likely way to do the calculation, and it's probably the best example as to why it's often easiest to first take whatever period you are getting paid in, annualize it, and then pull it back to whatever pay period that you're looking for, most often monthly, when thinking about budgeting and whatnot. Although you could do the same thing as on a weekly, you might be budgeting weekly or something like that. And so again, easiest to annualize typically and then pull back to whatever period you're looking at, weekly, monthly. Monthly is probably the most common.